Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to Adventures in History. I'm just some dude that knows a lot of history, and we're here to talk history and things history-esque, and have a good time, and maybe do some joking and laughing and giggling and maybe groaning at bad jokes, perhaps. Hope everybody is having a great week so far. It's been pretty good for me. I'm on summer break, so I have had a lot of time to prioritize what I want to and do things that I want to. I'm also working on a final project, wrapping up another master's degree in sociology. So I have been working on that big old project that I'm supposed to do. But mostly, I've been trying to not melt. It has been incredibly hot down here. And as the old trope goes, it's not just the heat, it's the humidity. Because we've had temperatures in the low to mid 90s, but our heat indices have been up over 110. Sundays or Saturdays heat index was 113. Yesterday got up to 111. Or how it feels. It's been really, really, really hot, and it's pretty hot right now. I am already starting to have too much humidity. Yeah, too much. But it's been a rough go of the heat, and this is a bit disconcerting because usually it doesn't get this hot until later on in the year. So if it's already this hot, that's a bit of a scary thing. But I hope you all are having a good one, and I hope you all are not in Humidityville like we are. So let's say hello to everybody. Hello, Kyle. Welcome. Hey, Fid. Welcome. And hey, Emmy. How are you all? Hope you all are doing super duper well. So we are doing a viewer request stream tonight. This was one... Hey, Figment. Welcome. This one was requested specifically by a friend of the channel and supporter of the channel, Paradox Moose, who redeemed adventure points to get this one done. So we're going to talk tonight about Atlantis. And we're going to do a little bit on where the idea about Atlantis comes from. And I'm actually going to read you some primary sources, which I normally try not to do. But I really wanted to impress the importance that so much of what people think about when they think about Atlantis is not really what the ancient people wrote. A lot of what we think about when we think about Atlantis is much more modern and has a much more sort of sci-fi feel to it. It is not what most people think it is. So I do have some primary passages that I'll read tonight. They are not too terribly long. It's not going to be like half of the stream is going to be me dictating primary sources to you. So don't freak out about that. But I do have some passages that I wanted to read. So yeah, as always on the stream, everybody is welcome to participate at whatever level you are comfortable with. If you want to just hang back and be really quiet, you are welcome to do that. It doesn't have a Stargate. No, there's no Stargate. I know. There's no Stargate at all, and there's a lot of stuff that gets attributed to Atlantis that are not actually Atlantis. Yeah, I know, boo. So if you want to, we can go ahead and we can knock off a lot of these sort of, I don't know, misnomers. There are no flying cars. There is no science so advanced that it looks like magic. There is no Stargate. There are no aliens. Most of what people wrote about in relation to Atlantis is honestly kind of mundane. The dial interface is way too retro anyway. So far, this is turning out to be the worst history stream ever. Let me just ruin all of your hopes and all of your dreams and destroy everything that you think that you knew. Oh, Kyle. You hear it's a lost empire. Yeah, it's not even really that. This isn't the History Channel. We do facts, not daydreams. Shots fired. Shots fired. All right. So I do have to confess something as well. I have been, for the last couple of weeks, talking about making a lurk command. There still is not a lurk command, and it's because I have completely forgotten how to make commands. And I only think about, hey, I should probably worry about refiguring out how to do commands after I sit down and start streaming. So I'll probably need to set an alarm for myself or an alert to remind me to make a lurk command. Because that seems to be the only way that I'm going to remember how to do it. But yeah, so let's actually talk a little bit about Atlantis. And we'll be looking at the map a lot tonight. So be prepared for liberal uses of Google Earth. And for those of you that do not know or have not heard me refer to this specifically, the program that I use down here, this great mapping software, is completely free. It's called Google Earth. You can download it for free. It's basically Google Street View for the entire world. It is an amazing tool, and I encourage everybody that is even slightly interested in history, geography, sociology, even anything that has any sort of interest in looking at stuff, to go get this program. You can use it for free. This will probably be my only look. Your internet is very slow right now. Alas, the history of the lurk command. It's turning into a bit of a saga for me, mostly because I keep forgetting to do it. Anyway, so let's start at the top. Atlantis. What is Atlantis? Well, to answer that question, we really have to start with the guy who really started the whole thing, and that is this dude. This dude's name is Plato, and Plato is the guy that really sets this whole thing going. If you are very, very diligent in reading ancient texts, you will know that he was not the first person to use the word Atlantis. There was actually a poet that wrote some poems about the children of the god Atlas that used the word Atlantis or Atlanteans to refer to the god Atlas's progeny. But Plato is the guy that actually talks about Atlantis in the actual ancient sources, and he's the first guy that we're going to talk about tonight. Plato. So, who was this guy? Well, he was a philosopher, and he was in that good old school of Athens. This was, of course, the biggest and most important philosophy school that existed in the Western Hemisphere at that time. It was in Athens. Socrates is very famous for effectively starting this, and Plato is going to be Socrates' student and went on to write down most of what we know about Socrates. And Plato himself is going to go on to write, yes, Socrates. If you've watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Journey, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Bogus Journey is the second one. You will recognize him as Socrates. the guy that they have to do a report on. But Plato is a fairly prolific writer, and he's going to write a whole series of discourses and dialogues, and he's going to write several big monographs, including The Republic, which is one of his more famous works, which sort of extols the virtues of living in and working a republic as a form of government. Of course, this was an attempt to justify the Athenian way of life as opposed to monarchs or autocrats or oligarchs. Without getting too far into Greek history, there is a big argument about the best way to run a city between especially Athens and Sparta, sort of our two ancient enemies in Greece. And the Republic is sort of his treatise that says, no, the best way to do this is with a republic, and here's why, and here's how. And that's actually a fairly salient point, because that's going to be important when we get a little bit further into the discussion. So the material that we have that discusses all of Atlantis as it's first actually described in the primary source in the ancient world would probably fit on about 3 pages in, if you're familiar with Microsoft Word. So if you made maybe 3 or 4 pages, so maybe 2,000 words total is all that we have of an actual description of ancient Atlantis. And the first piece that I'm going to actually read here for you is from one of Plato's writings. It's called Timaeus. Timaeus. And this is a dialogue. So when Plato wrote these, he wrote these as a conversation. And it's almost like a little bit of a play where he has lines that were supposed to be recorded, elements of a dialogue between several individuals. Timaeus was Plato's travel blog. No, Timaeus was supposed to be an original person, an actual Greek. He and another guy named Critias are supposed to be the individuals that sort of upheld the knowledge of Atlantis within the Greek system. So Plato is recounting this dialogue between Timaeus and another guy named Critias, and these two guys are going to talk briefly about Atlantis. So in the work Timaeus, we mostly get the story of the kind of description of where Atlantis is and what ended up happening to it. And then in Critias, we get a little bit more, especially dealing with the way that the actual island was supposedly laid out and all the people that lived there. So let's get in a little bit. So I'm going to read here for you just a brief excerpt from the work Timaeus. If you want to, by the way, you can Google Plato and Timaeus with the words full text, and you can read all of this in translation online for free. It's pretty easy to find. So Plato says, Timaeus is speaking, the most famous of them all, and here he's talking about the most famous of them all were events from the history of Athens. Was the overthrow of the island of Atlantis. This island lay over against the pillars of Heracles. In the extent, it was greater than Libya and Asia put together, and was the passage to the other islands and to a great ocean, of which the Mediterranean Sea was only a harbor. And within the pillars, the empire of Atlantis reached to Europe, to Tyrrhenia, and to Libya, to Egypt. The mighty power was arrayed against Egypt and Greece, and all the countries bordering the Mediterranean. Then did your city, and again here this city is Athens, did bravely win renown over the entire earth, for at the peril of her own existence, and when the other Hellenes had deserted her, she repelled the invader, and of her own accord gave liberty to all the nations within the pillars. And a while after that there was a great earthquake and floods, and the warrior race sank into the earth, and the great island of Atlantis also disappeared into the sea. This is the explanation of the shallows which are found in that part of the Atlantic Ocean. So we get a little snippet here, a very small snippet, and basically what Plato is saying here through the dialogue of Timaeus is that there was this big island called Atlantis, and it was out past this geographic area called the Pillars of Heracles. Heracles is a Greek version of Hercules, so the Pillars of Hercules. And it was a really big zone that fought with Athens. And eventually there was a big earthquake, and it sank into the ocean, and Athens ended up winning, and now there are shallow portions of the ocean. So that doesn't really say a lot. That's a fairly tectonically active area, right? Exactly, Kyle. Earthquakes are incredibly common in the Mediterranean area, and especially in the ancient world before they knew how to build things in reaction to seismic events. They were particularly devastating. When I say seismically active, there is a fairly sizable earthquake, estimating probably in the 5 to 6 on the Richter scale, around every 10 or 20 years. So it's liable that within any individual's life there would have been 1 or 2 big seismic events during the ancient world. We have a lot of ancient records of this city was wrecked by an earthquake. This city was wrecked by a tsunami because of earthquakes. This city was completely devastated by earthquakes. I actually had a friend invite me into a conversation just earlier this week about the ancient city of Antioch, and specifically how some ancient maps had portrayed the layout of the city of Antioch, and they were asking what happened to the river's path going through the city. At one point it looks like this, but at another point it looks like that. And the answer is that there were a whole bunch of earthquakes, and at one point it's very likely, based on interpretations of ancient sources, that they used some of the rubble from the collapse of all of these buildings to kind of fill in this part of the river and turn what was an island into part of the main land, so that you didn't have to worry about bridges that would fall down during seismic events anymore. So this region all around the Mediterranean that you're going to look at here is incredibly seismically active. So this is all of what the ancient people would have known. This is Egypt, the Levant, what is today Turkey, which they would have called Anatolia or Asia Minor. The peninsula of the Balkans itself is very prone to this, as are the regions that we would traditionally associate with Italy or Rome, and as far away over here as Spain. So you can even look at the crust of the earth, and you can note where these ridges are. Anywhere you see a big mountain range is usually a sign of crustal boundaries pressing against each other, and this big line of mountains right here is one of them. So this is going to trigger a lot of seismic activity. That's a great question. So yeah, and the people in the ancient world would have known about this, right? So Poseidon's wrath, yeah, there's an earthquake out in the middle of the ocean, and there's a big tsunami. And Poseidon, for those that are not super familiar with Greek mythology, Poseidon is the god of the ocean, but he's also the god of earthquakes. And the ancient people understood that there was a direct causal link between earthquakes and really bad water-related activity, like these big tsunamis that would show up. So that's a little bit of what we know. Now there's a tiny little bit that you get towards the end of Timaeus that seems to reflect back on Atlantis. So let me read that for you, and then we'll move on to Critias. On the other hand, when the gods purge the earth with a deluge of water, the survivors in your country are herdsmen and shepherds who dwell on the mountains. But those who, like you, live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. Whereas in this land, referring to Atlantis, neither then nor at any time does the water come down from above on the fields, having always a tendency to come up from below, for which reason the traditions preserved here are the most ancient. So this is sort of referring to this idea that earthquakes were bad for cities because cities are almost always on the shoreline in the ancient world or somewhere associated with water. And Atlantis is no different. So when there are seismic events in Greece, people could run up into the hills. However, when this sort of thing happened in Atlantis, because of the way that it was laid out, mostly being a big flat plain, it sort of wrecked their entire world. So this is hinting at what happened to Atlantis. But we need to move to Critias, who is going to give us a little bit more. And again, this is written by Plato, and you can, again, if you want to go to Google and search Plato Critias full text, you can find this particular dialogue. And we're going to get a lot more about Atlantis in this dialogue. And again, this is Timaeus and Critias are in both of these dialogues. They're sort of different conversations. The first one was led by Timaeus, the second one is led by Critias, and Plato is writing these both down. When do we get to Namor? That is a little bit later, especially once we get to modern day, more modern day, where people start applying a whole bunch of sort of science-y, fiction-y, gibberishy stuff to the actual stories, and then later on go on to retcon Namor as a mutant, which I feel like the original Namor would have really hated. Or Jason Momoa, even. So, let's talk about Critias, and I'll read a little bit of an excerpt here, and then we'll talk a little bit more about some description stuff that I won't go into in full text, and then I'll wrap up with another quote from Critias, and then we'll sort of talk about that again. So, this is again from Critias, Plato's Discourse. Let me begin by observing, first of all, that 9,000 was the sum of years which had elapsed since the war which was said to have taken place between those who dwelt outside the Pillars of Heracles and those who dwelt within them. This is the war that I'm going to describe. So this gives us a timeline context. And Critias is telling this story from the position of a particular individual, we'll talk about later on, and this is giving us a time terminus. So basically 9,000 years prior to the events in this particular discourse is when Atlantis was supposed to have collapsed. Now, right away, that is going to pose some issues, most significantly that Athens was not a city 9,000 years prior. So how could they then have fought a war against the people from outside the Pillars of Hercules? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. So Critias goes on to describe the population of Atlantis and says that they were initially descended from Poseidon himself. Poseidon had found this particular lovely young lady that he, of course, had sex with and then had babies with. And at that point, there was now this sort of hybridized human god race that he took over to this location and propped up. New ruins of Göbekli Tepe factor into these stories, not directly. There's probably no evidence that would support the idea that there was any sort of city at Athens 9,000 years prior to this particular story being told. So Plato lived from about 427 to about 363. And at that period of time, that would have been 9,343 BC. That's way before what we would even understand as cities existed. Göbekli Tepe is from about 10,000 BC, which is really honking old. And I would love to talk about that in a more detailed story that sort of plays into my concept of Atlantis, which we're not getting into tonight because it involves a whole bunch of speculation. And it involves a whole bunch of also really weird layout stuff. So we're not doing Shane's version of Atlantis tonight. So if anybody was hoping to sneak a peek at Shane's version of Atlantis. This is not contained in tonight's stream. But yeah, Göbekli Tepe does throw a wrench into a lot of things because it's so old and it implies organized skilled labor, which we didn't believe existed at that time. But that is a deeper question that is going to have to be answered at another time. Also, hey DJ Cognac, and hey David. Also, hey Arcadian. And I don't know if I said hey to Vern. Hey Vern. And hey KP. I don't know if I said hello to anybody. I'm being very rude tonight. I apologize for that, my friends. When we shell out enough points or votes at the end of streams for it. I don't know about that, Shane. I have an awful lot of points. I don't know what I want to do that. I might make that a community goal, similar to what we did with one of the History of Middle Earth streams, and put a really ridiculously high goal on it, and then let you all burn off some points, if you so desire. What would you all think about that? I'll let you respond. I know that there's a lag between me talking and you all typing. Okay, maybe I will do that, and we'll have that'll also give me some time to prepare better images than I currently have. So, all right. So they are descended from Poseidon. Critias also goes on to say that they lived in this big metropolis in the center of the island. And this big city was ruled by a republic. It was surrounded by a big fertile plain that ran out to the ocean. There were some mountains nearby, but mostly there to sort of act as really cool, visuals. And in the center of the city, there was this big pillar. And the pillar had the laws of the city inscribed upon it. And anyone could go look at the laws of the city. And from this, they developed a rather peaceful existence. And I'll read here the longest quote for tonight. And this will sort of wrap us up. The lost city of Atlanta. No, Autumn. That's from Futurama. The lost city of Atlanta, where everybody speaks with a horribly affected Southern accent and they're half fish. Also, hey Autumn. Hope you're having a great night, my friend. So one more quote from Critias. This one is a bit of a longer one, but it's got a lot of good information in it. So here we go. This is all talking about the people of Atlantis. They were not to take up arms against one another, which is, crazy enough as it is. And they were all to come together to the rescue if any one of their cities attempted to overthrow the royal house. Like their ancestors, they were to deliberate in common about war and other matters, giving supremacy to the descendants of the gods. And the king was not to have power over life or death over any of his kinsmen, unless he had the assent of the majority of the 10. So this is like a council that supported the king. Such was the vast power which the gods settled in the lost island of Atlantis. And this, afterwards, he directed against our land, this being Athens, for the following reason, as tradition tells. For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws, and well affectioned towards the god, whose seed they were. Again, they are descended from the gods. For they possessed true in every way great spirits, uniting gentleness with wisdom in the various chances of life, and in their intercourse with one another. They despised everything but virtue, caring little for their present state of life, and thinking lightly of their possessions, gold, and other property, which they see only as a burden to them. Neither were they intoxicated by luxury, nor did wealth deprive them of their self-control. They were sober, and they saw clearly that all of these things are increased by virtue and friendship with one another. whereas by too great regard and respect for them, they lose friendship. By such reflections and by their continuance of a divine nature, the qualities which we have described grew and increased among them. But when the divine portion began to fade away and became diluted too often and too much with mortal admixture, the human nature got the upper hand. And then, being unable to bear their fortune, they behaved unseemly. And to him who had an eye to see, they grew visibly debased, for they were losing the fairest of their precious gifts. But to those who had no eye to see the true happiness, they appeared glorious and blessed at the very time when they were full of avarice and unrighteous power. Zeus, the god of gods, who rules according to law and is able to see such things, perceiving that an honorable race was in woeful plight and wanting to inflict punishment on them, that they might be chastened to improve, collected all of the good things, mostly of their habitation, which being placed in the center of their world, beheld and created all things and destroyed it. So pretty much what the story is saying here is that these Atlantean people were super rich, but over time, they allowed the glorious nature of their history to become too human, and they gave up their peace and their humility for love of glory, and then the gods punished them. So this is a bit of a morality tale, that what actually doomed Atlantis was not just the earthquake and the tidal wave, but it was in fact the hubris that they had, believing that they were the cause of all of their goods and all of their fortunes. But even so, that this is again one of the longest discourses that we have on Atlantis, but you don't hear anything about flying cars, you don't hear anything about super levels of technology, you don't have anything about them having, psychic powers or laser beam vision, or, floating around in the sky on machinery. They don't have any of that stuff. What Atlantis is described as is a place of peace where everybody was living together and money didn't have any purpose other than, as a means of exchange. However, why do we then think about all of this other stuff? Well, we'll get to that a little bit later on. Your life is a lie. It sounds like the sin of Sodom. Well, then see, that's the thing. A lot of these stories of the destruction of cities are morality tales. They are designed to show you what happens when you do the bad stuff. Because that part is the secret part. We don't talk about secret Atlantis. Right. The secret Atlantis, where they kept all of the science and technology. They were hoarding the Game Boys and the iPhone 3s, right? But that's pretty much what we get from the actual original sources. Now, keep rolling your eyes. Just keep laughing. Of course, the Athenian is not going to talk about flying cars. Right, because, they don't have flying cars, so why would the guy from Athens talk about them being so much better? Atlantis Big Tech is coming for you. What always gets me is when Atlantis is referred to as an advanced civilization, people forget it only had to be advanced relative to the rest of the world at the time. Arcadian, that is a great point. If we were looking at what everybody else was, if we are going to accept this rough timeline of 9,000 or so BC, everyone else on the world would not have been living in cities. They would have had just barely scratched the surface of agriculture. They would have been basically just figuring out how to do domestication. So they would have just figured out, like, hey, we can capture those goats and turn them into things that we can eat. He was from Atlantis. Like the levels of technology that they had is not some super duper thing. But even in that particular discussion, you don't hear them talking about tools made of iron or tools made of bronze. What made them advanced, according to the story, is their peace and the version of government that they used, where they had a king, but the king couldn't act unilaterally. The king didn't have the power to kill anybody without going to the council. That the people respected the law, and that the people were humble and looked at each other as equals. That was the advancement. The advanced culture was culture. It was, we can live in harmony and relative equality, whereas everybody else in the world was still stabbing each other with pointy sticks. So that's the advanced level of culture that we're talking about here. Right, the fact that they lived in a society, correct. This idea that they had organized government at that time when everybody else was supposedly not. However, we do have to remember that in this story, it is also assumed that Athens was still a city at that time, and that there were other cultures that existed in Libya and Egypt and Greece, because according to the story, this war that started was between Atlantis and all of the other cultures of the Mediterranean world. So this is assuming a lot. It is also assuming that the people didn't know their own history, which is quite probable and actually quite believable. So there we go. You think Atlantis architecture was all made of bread. Bread cities, British Gala towers, and marble rye rotundas. Yeah, man, do you need a Snickers? The old bag took my marble rye. But then came the water, and it just got soggy. It all just got soggy. All right, so let's talk a little bit about this guy named Solon, and we'll actually get to the title for tonight, Solon and Thanks for All the Fish, which is a double-level joke, and I won't go into it. I hope you all know it. Atlantis, done in by carbs. It was the carbs. The gluten. Bread cities explain why we can't find ruins. Because it went to the bottom of the ocean and got eaten by fish. 42. There you go, Vern. Do you know the Muffin Man? I don't know. Top of the muffin to you. Anyway, so who is this Solon guy? So, according to the stories that Plato wrote, or the dialogues that Plato wrote, the original Greek that discovered this story of Atlantis was a guy named Solon. Solon was an actual Athenian. He lived from about 638 to about 558, which is pretty far back for Athens. And, well, that's Plato. I forgot to switch pictures. Pictures, switch. Boop, there we go. There's Solon. He looks like this. So that's where celiac disease came from. The Atlantean genes. Yes, they could build the crouton towers because they could not eat the crouton towers. And now we know. Now we've solved the whole thing. This is really going to make a lot of people feel kind of crummy. And I suspect that if we keep going, we'll get past just scratching the crust of this, and we'll get down to the actual heart of the deal. Yeah. Croutons were fencing. Well, before we let this rise any further, I probably need to move on with the story. I once baked a bread that was solid stone. Bad jokes no matter how you slice it. Yeah, pretty much. You know, the proof is in the puns. Well, before you get another pun in the oven, I probably need to move along. Anyway, I can do this all night, by the way, and especially with chat participation, we can just pun for the rest of the night. We used it as a doorstop; it didn't even rot. Oh man! Funny that you mentioned weaponized bakery. I don't know how many people have read any of the books from Terry Pratchett's Discworld. But if you have, you might be familiar with the fact that dwarves in Discworld actually use baking as weaponry, because they bake bread that is so hard it can literally be used as weapons. There are throwing stars and shields and armor that are all made out of bread, and the throne of the dwarven kings is actually called the Scone of Stone. So, yes. Yes, dwarf bread. Yes, see, I love this stuff. How did this chat go so awry? Right back at you, buddy. When at sea, beat a shark to death with the dwarven bread and then eat the shark. I want to toast you for deciding to quit. I love you guys. I really do. All right, so who is Solon? Why are we talking about him? Why am I spending time talking about this guy? Anyway, so the story goes that Solon was this ancient Greek guy from Athens that was a politician, but in order to sort of understand the way that the world operated, he wanted to travel to all of these different locations. And he traveled all over Asia Minor, and he ended up traveling down into Egypt. And according to the story, while in Egypt, he met with this Egyptian priest. And the priest was a priest of the Egyptian goddess Niet. Niet is, this is sort of an important part to the story. Niet was a goddess that was associated with the sort of primordial chaos before the world, and then the origin of the world. So theoretically, the priests of Niet would know all of the lands that had been created and know the history of all of the lands of created because they had been exposed to this knowledge from their god, or goddess that they patronized, right? So Niet supposedly had revealed these histories and origins of places, and it was there that Solon first heard the story of Atlantis. And so he learns this story, and he goes back to Athens, where supposedly he decided that he was going to write this whole saga, write the whole story down as a big poem that would sort of be like equal to either the Iliad or the Odyssey. You know, one of these big, huge, epic poems of thousands of lines and big stories, but he never actually did it. So instead, he just taught the story to other Greeks. And the Greeks, Timaeus and Critias, the two people that Plato recorded, were supposedly able to trace the transmission of their knowledge back through several hundred years to the original storyteller of Solon. Yeah, there we go. Niet. Not Niet. Yes, Vern has it. So the story comes from Solon 9,000 years before him. You know, this is again like 9,500 or 9,600 BC. But that's where Plato claims he heard the story from. So Solon heard it from this priest from Egypt. He told other Greeks. Those Greeks ended up telling Timaeus and Critias over a couple hundred years later. And then Plato was able to overhear the conversation between Timaeus and Critias and then wrote it down. So this is the sort of lineage of the story of Atlantis. And I do want to point out that we don't have basically any evidence of any of this. We don't have any stories in Egypt that seem to refer to Atlantis. We don't have any sort of actual document that seems to have been written around the time of Solon or by the time of Solon that would have contained this story. We don't have any reference to anybody knowing this story prior to Plato writing it. So Plato is considered at this point the primary source. So he is the guy that is actually writing this down, and then from there it is going to be disseminated through the ancient world. You heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who heard it from a goddess who was messing around. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, you know, totally logical game of telephone there. Everybody knows that you can believe what your friend of a 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 priest of a goddess told you, right? Everybody knows that. So the primary source 9,000 years later. Yes. I'm glad you picked that up. So 9,000 years after this thing supposedly happened, we get the actual first primary source of somebody writing the story down. Now, what does that mean? What can we say about that based on this idea? Well, even in the ancient world, there were some people that thought he was full of junk. So Aristotle, if you know anything about the Greeks, you know that Aristotle was one of Plato's students. Aristotle thought Plato was making it up. Aristotle thought that the reason Plato had created this myth was to push his larger work, the Republic, because he created this ancient civilization that was supposedly super peaceful and super powerful, and they were a republic. So, hey, look, here's this great ancient story that I based my writing of Republic on. And what Aristotle sort of suggested was that people were making fun of the Republic because Plato acted like Athens had sort of completely created this when Athens pretty clearly didn't. So he wanted to give a justification like, no. It wasn't those other places. Athens learned about this from the original republic called Atlantis 9,000 years ago. So clearly I'm right and you're wrong. There's some legitimacy feel to that, right? You know, if you are a super popular philosopher and you come out with an idea that people go, well, that's just not right, you might feel a certain need to perhaps embellish a story to make your ideas a little bit more, you know, a little bit more potent, perhaps. So Aristotle, even right after Plato died, was like, yeah, he made all that crap up. Another writer, a guy named Proculus, who wrote in the 400s AD, also said, yeah, Plato pretty clearly made that up because he was really just trying to teach an allegory. Like he was trying to tell you the story of how the pride of the Atlanteans led to their downfall. That was really what made them fall. Hey, Cave, welcome. Sounds like a load of croculus. Hey, Magnificent, welcome. Fake news, not a new thing then. Oh, no, absolutely. Fake news is as old as humans are. As long as there's someone willing to believe a lie, there has been fake news. So it feels like an allegory, like it was the first real fantasy novel. So even that, though, if we look back through time, we can see other pieces of literature that follow that genre trope. There's the big, powerful city that, because of the negative actions of people within the city, angers the gods and then gets destroyed. That's something that goes all the way back to Mesopotamia in the 2500s BC. So even if we're supposing, and again, we're just supposing, if we're supposing that Plato just wrote this story as kind of a bullcrap way to support his ideas, that trope had been around long enough that people, even if they recognized that he was writing a trope, would get the message, right? So even if you look at a meme, if it's a bad meme, you still know how to, based on your exposure to the meme, you go like, oh yeah, it works as a meme and it works with this particular layout, but it's just not really that funny. You can make something that's functional that's not good. And you can make something that's good that's not necessarily the right way. So even if Plato did sort of create all of this stuff, it still served its purpose as being a trope that you could use to go, oh yeah, I get your point, okay, fine. You were too slow. Instead of learning Plato's lessons, we became obsessed with a lost island. Yeah, pretty much. I don't care if it's fake news necessarily. It could be alternative facts. Was there a cave there with shadows? I get what you're referring to, but that's not where that comes from. I'm willing to bet his grammar and spelling were good. Yes, absolutely. Great grammar from Plato. So there were ancient people, though, that believed him. A couple of generations after Plato died, one of Plato's basically students and grand students, if you will. So Plato taught this guy who then taught a guy named Crantor, who is spelled like this. Crantor apparently completely believed Plato and believed that everything that he said was accurate. And even according to Crantor's own writing, which, again, this is stuff that you can go look up. You can go look up Crantor's writings and just Google Crantor full text, and you can find all this stuff. He went to Egypt and apparently found the very thing that Solon had looked at and spoke with priests that knew the story. So, according to Crantor, he verified Plato's accounts that Plato recorded from, down the line into Solon. So, Crantor is just about 50 years after Plato had died, so, there are people on both sides that thought that he made it up, that he was being accurate. There are people on both sides of this issue that seem to make decent arguments about it. Whether or not it's real, we can argue about a lot more if you would really want to. But here's the thing. That's just big philosophy trying to cover up the lies. He went to the school of that guy. That guy can't be publicly shamed. That would mean his degree was garbage, right? You gotta go stick up for all of the sins of the past. Otherwise, the thing that you work for is worth nothing. Meanwhile, in America... Oh, that's too much. Okay, so when it comes to detail, though, that's really about it. Again, we don't have super technology. We don't have electricity. We don't have flying cars. We don't have, magically suspended buildings floating around in the sky. We don't have laser beams. We don't have aliens. We don't have any of that stuff. So how then did those ideas get into the story? Well, it's mostly people from a lot later. And one of those guys is a dude named Athanasius, and I can't type and spell at the same time, so give me a second. Athanasius Kircher. So, Athanasius Kircher is a guy who was alive in the 1630s, and he's going to be a map maker and, to a certain extent, a historian and a traveler. We need to remember that in the 1630s, one of the big crazes is the New World. They had, at that point, crossed the oceans. They knew that all of this stuff was over here. This had set off this whole new suspense, this whole new crazy thing. Like, what if all of this is Atlantis? Those 17th century cartographers, right? So, if we look at the maps of Kircher, he's going to place Atlantis somewhere around in here. And for those of us that are map inclined, I was going to show you a map. You knew it. How did you think that you were going to get through a discussion with me and me not show you a map? Please. Oh, dear sweet summer child. So this is the first map that Kircher draws. And he draws this one, pardon me, in 1664. So, and again, it's oriented badly. North is actually down here. He drew it upside down. America would be over here, and then you can see Africa and Spain, the Atlantic Ocean. Is the boat to scale? No, that would be a really honking big boat. So, a whole new world. Yeah, exactly. We don't have them saying there wasn't aliens, laser beams, and flying cars, so clearly it had to be the thing, right? Anyway, so what we see here is that we have the site of the island of Atlantis in the ocean between the outskirts of Egypt, according to the story of the Egyptian story from Plato's description. So basically he's basing this on Plato's description that he got from Egypt, and it's a fairly rudimentary map. There are some, in the account of Critias, there is a basic description of the size of Atlantis. So many stadia this way, so many stadia that way, yada, yada, yada. But this is going to really excite the population, and people get really excited about what if we can find Atlantis. So Kircher is actually going to go on and make another map, which is this map. It looks like it's about the size of 9 boats. Right? So this is what we would call the full Kircher map. This is from 1675. And this is his version of the world. You can see that this is New England, and you can see the Atlantic and South America and North America. But if we look right here, right in the middle, we can see our old island of Atlantis. So there we go. He has placed it in context. Oop, you can't see my mouse. There we go. Right here. The island of Atlantis. So here it is in relation to where it would be in the whole world. And there's a little bit of messiness going on here. Again, you can just look at this and understand that this is not necessarily to scale in a lot of places. You can understand that they had not necessarily explored the whole world. Most specifically, if we look down here in this corner here and then the corner over here, you can tell that they had not completely mapped out Australia. They had just gone, all of this is unknown land of the South. I mean, for the 1600s, it's not that bad. Right, so 1675, we had circumnavigated the world. It's not the worst map ever. But note the inclusion of Atlantis. So that's a pretty big deal. And this is going to get a lot of traction. A lot of people get excited about this. And a lot of people start thinking...
I'm Spartacus!
They start thinking that they're Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Oh, Spartacus. Hey, Tuna. Thanks so much for that sub, man. And enjoy your Spartacus. Everybody gets to be Spartacus if they want to be Spartacus. I should recall, everybody, Spartacus emote drawn and constructed by our very own Vern NYC. So if you want some neat Spartacus emotes or other emotes, you should talk to Vern. Also, the new fancy layout that we have here on the stream from Color by Emmy. Everybody, if you want some sprucing up of your channel, go check out Color by Emmy, who does great work. And I can't say better things. So we have this new world. We have all of this stuff. We don't know what's going on here. Why not throw Atlantis out here in the ocean? So there we go. So the stuff by Kircher is going to set off of a bit of a rally. Everybody gets re-excited about Atlantis. And you're going to start seeing a lot of people sort of pick up this as a theme. And one of the guys that's really going to put a lot of focus into this is this guy. Bum-ba-da-bum. Francis Bacon. Yep. Good old Francis Bacon. Oh, Francis Bacon. Any relation to Kevin Bacon? I don't actually know, but if so, maybe he's 6 or so generations away. Let's doodle in Atlantis, and let's sprinkle in some sea monsters too. But make sure that your sea monsters have a happy little friend. Maybe there are no mistakes, only happy crackcidents. That was supposed to be a Kraken joke, but I don't think it landed all the way. Crackincidents? I don't know. You knew what I was talking about, though, so don't hate too much. Is there bacon in Atlantis? I don't know if there were pigs in Atlantis. I would suspect that there were, but there's not any direct relationship to that, maybe. Anyway, so in 1687, Francis Bacon writes a book called A New Atlantis. And this is sort of capitalizing on the fervor of new interest. No, it would be with a K, like that, because it's supposed to be Kraken. Speaking of Kraken, how stoked is Seattle with the new hockey team? I know somebody from Seattle area that likes hockey, and she is pretty stoked about the new hockey team. Crackcidents, you have those often on your stream. Lucky you haven't been banned for the exposure. Is that what you do when you go on break? You just sneak out to the bathroom and have a little crackcident? Anyway, Autumn doesn't do drugs on his stream. I was just joking. Don't go to Autumn's stream hoping to induce him to do drugs. That's not what he does over there. You should go follow Autumn anyway. We should do all the shout-outs. Go follow Cave Geek, because he's a cool guy and a good friend. He's a great streamer. I've got to type all the things. Go follow David Peterson, who is apparently not going to get his shout-out because I'm typing too fast. Boom! There we go. You're actually talking about butt crack, which may or may not have been more offensive than drugs. According to Twitch, about the same. Both will get you banned. Unless you fall into a certain stream channel, but I won't. We won't go there. Anyway, go follow Autumn, who has a great chat and a fun atmosphere and does dope art. And gets fart noises that happen to him all the time. Go follow Color by Emmy, who did all of this stuff again, and talk to her about all the cool stuff that she does. Good stuff. Don't follow Kyle. He doesn't stream. A new hockey team that isn't junior players. Interesting. You should look up your local Seattle sports ball news. Oh, sports ball. Next stream, history of Twitch's TOS and the ever-evolving history of the TOS and how it applies and how it doesn't apply. If they're the same, wouldn't they cancel each other out? Okay, now we're getting to the actual process of crack drugs, and I don't really want to go there. I love you guys, but I'll pump the brakes on that one. Anyway, so Francis Bacon writes this book called The New Atlantis, wherein he poses that America or somewhere in America is where this new Atlantis is. And in there, he starts putting in a whole bunch of sciencey stuff. So perhaps this is where some of the technology of the ancient world was developed. Perhaps they were an advanced society. During this time, you're also going to start with the genre trope of writing about ancient utopias, which had not ever really been a thing until this movement of the Enlightenment. And there's a little bit of that the Atlanteans were so technologically and fundamentally advanced that they had a culture that was completely without strife, and they could do that because of their advancements. And you start getting a little bit of this bigger than life story on top of what was already a bigger than life story. And what's really going to hit the peak of this, really, have you read Genesis? I don't know about specifically which one you're talking about, but the living in the garden in Utopia, that didn't last very long. But I don't know specifically to which part of Genesis you are referring, because somebody gets killed in there pretty quick. All right, but the real fanciful elements are going to come from... Open, I'm typing in the wrong area. I need to be typing over here. Still getting used to this new Ignatius Donnelly. Ignatius Donnelly. And you're like, who is that guy? I've never heard of that guy. Ignatius Donnelly is this guy. Okay. Oh, the show Genesis. I don't know the show Genesis. Are you talking about some Atlantis I don't know what you're talking about, Keith. I am lost. So this is Ignatius Donnelly. He was a writer, and he's going to start writing about Atlantis, and he's the guy that is really going to turn on the level 9 crazy advanced superistic stuff. He's going to be the guy that proposes that the Atlanteans were so advanced that they could actually repel gravity, that they were floating up in the air. Yeah, I don't get the jokes either. I'm not like thising it. I apologize. So he's 10,000 years removed from Atlantis as a source. He's actually 20,000 or 11,000 years removed from Atlantis as a source. And he's writing about how, based on his interpretation of the ancient world, Atlantis had floating stuff. They could use magnetism and electricity. They had the knowledge of the ancients. You also have to remember that during this period of time, there was a bit of a fad with this sort of global idea that people in the ancient world were just super duper advanced. If you were here during our description or our stream where we talked about Nazi occultism, one of the big ideas floating around during this time was this stuff called theophany, where basically the super ancient people had all of this knowledge and technology that was then lost, or they used to be descended from this perfect race, and then mixing with other races made them dumber. And there's a lot of people that look at the story of Atlantis and go, see, they used to be related to the gods, and then they got more human, and then the humans ruined it all. But another thing that our buddy Ignatius is going to do is that he is going to draw himself a map. And here we go. Sounds like Ignatius was sniffing a certain something off of a certain something. When do we cover the facts from Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis primary source? Oh, goodness gracious. Ignatius sounds like he hated gravity class and started to daydream about stuff after doing the worst version of a wiki search. When was he? So the book that he published a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. The antediluvian world means the world before the flood. He published this in 1882. So again, these late 1880s, we're getting all of this weird sciencey stuff because people were developing scientific theory but didn't really understand a lot of the scientific theory. If you were with us last when we were talking about electricity, one of the reasons he included stuff like they understood electricity was because that was a thing that was being sort of nailed down and understood during this period of time, the 1880s and early 1900s. So he basically is taking all the stuff that was sort of being hyped up at the time that he wrote this and then saying, oh, but Atlantis had it first. So, went backwards. So here is his version of Atlantis. And he is going to say that all of the stuff that's here was the area that Atlantis had conquered or had knowledge of. So all of the colored stuff here, the white colored stuff, or the yellowy colored stuff, that's outside of the shaded areas, were territories that had exposure to Atlantis and that they knew about. So basically, this culture 9,000 years back in time knew about the coastlines of all of the major river systems and all of the major water systems in the world. The reason he chose this particular area is because it lines up with something that is an actual factor of nature. So if we look here in the middle of the Atlantic, we have this zone, and it is called the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And if we look at it, we can tell that there is a shallow spot. If we're looking at this, clearly this is deeper, this is shallow. And so according to him, this is evidence that this is where Atlantis used to be. Because of the story about how Plato said that this was the reason for the shallow parts of the ocean today. So they missed the east coast of the United States. So, yeah, see, that's the thing. Like, even his own map doesn't necessarily make the best looking knowledge. Apparently, they really dislike cold weather. Nobody likes the cold weather except for me. I love cold weather. If you or a loved one has been exposed to Atlantis, seek immediate philosophical support. If you experience delusions of Atlantis that last more than 4 hours, seek a counselor immediately. How did they map stuff back then? Free-handed. Well, of course, by that point, they had pretty detailed latitude and longitudinal calculations. They were using really detailed surveying equipment that, doesn't require satellite technology. So we're talking about Atlanta. Oh, yeah. There we go. Welcome, Bubba. How's it going? Now we use sonar, but back then. So they would have gone down the coastline and sat on a ship by the coastline and done basically surveying work where the ship would have moved a little bit and people would have moved on the coast. And they would have moved a little bit and then people would have moved on the coast. And, you keep yourself in order, and they would have done that pretty much all the way around the world. It's a very, very tedious thing, and it took a lot of people doing it at the same time. But clearly, one person is not going to map the entire world. Ask your doctor if Atlantis is right for you. You're referring to the underwater topography. They knew that it was shallow. They did not know what it looked like. You can tell just by the way that the currents operate, and at some points of that region of the middle of the Atlantic, you can just look down and see that there are peaks under the water because the water's pretty clear, and if it's still, you can see it. So they're not necessarily doing underwater topography, getting every single mountain range. They just knew at this region or so, there is a shallower spot. You may be entitled to compensation from whatever drug trial you didn't volunteer for. Atlantis is covered by most insurances. If you can't afford Atlantis, Ignatius Donnelly might be able to help. This is why I love you all. This is the good stuff. So, yeah, ask your doctor if Atlantis is right for you. So, okay, that's pretty much where the fanciful part of Atlantis comes from. And since then, of course, we've added all of this other stuff. We've added all of the science-y, wancy stuff. We've added all of the magic-y, wagic-y stuff. All of that is afterwards. This is mostly going to start in the 1600s with this idea that Atlantis was some sort of hyper-advanced culture. By the time we get to the 1800s, they're going to hit a moment in history where people were ripe for the idea that ancient civilizations had lost technology, and then they were going to take that example of Atlantis and combine it with a lot of other stuff like Hyperborea, Ultima Thule, all of these other ideas of these lost civilizations from way, way back before some big catastrophic event. They're all going to sort of get lumped together, and this is where Atlantis is going to get laser beams and flying cars. All right. Hey, all. Welcome. Ignatius Donnelly Foundation has been non-profit since its founding back in the day. But what about Aquaman? That's added on later. You missed where the aliens land on the Atlantis map. Aliens. What is Atlantis? So the story of Atlantis comes from a Greek guy named Plato, and it was supposedly, according to the story, this island somewhere in the middle of the ocean that had a very big population very, very long time ago. What about the theory of Atlantis off of Cuba? Yeah, there are a ton of theories, and that's actually what we're getting to right now, Bubba. That is in the alternate Earth that separates... That's from Earth 2, maybe. So did we cover the rich hat structure yet? No, we're not going to talk about Mauritania. That's just a naturally occurring area. Hey, don't you talk smack about Hyperborea. Crom will smite you. Yes, the Hyperborea and Hyborea are different. And no mentions of Mike Mignola's contribution. I know. Atlantis, brought to you by aliens. Where did Plato get the idea from? Supposedly, okay, so there are two options. Either Plato completely made it up, or Plato heard it from some other Greek guys that heard it from some other Greek guys that heard it from this Greek guy named Solon that heard it from an Egyptian priest. You think the Mauritania thingy is the most recent theory about Atlantis' location? Yeah, but it doesn't have any weight. It's the whole thing. So for those of you that are wondering exactly what I'm talking about here with Arcadian, there is a theory that down here off of one of the coastal regions of the country, Mauritania, there is a natural structure that looks like it could have been used as a ship dock, and it has, because of the particular geological formation of that area, it has red stones, white stones, and black stones. This seems to align with a particular part of the story where Plato said that the docks of Atlantis were made out of red, black, and white stones. But it's a naturally occurring formation. It was not actually man-made. And the theory is basically just one more in the long line of crackpot theories of where Atlantis actually is/was. The Greeks had a wild imagination. They did indeed. It is interesting, but it's also probably not defensible. There have not been people there permanently long enough for it to even have really been something contemporary to the ancient Greeks. Plato was drunk again. Someone take him home. We're not. If anybody wants to talk about that, they can go look that up themselves. We've got to get through a whole bunch of other stuff before we get to the end. But yeah, I didn't even consider that one because I didn't necessarily feel as if it had a lot of legs to stand on. I refuse your reality and substitute it with my own. Can we get a zoom? Atlantis really lives in our hearts and our minds. Hey, Amir Berzini, welcome. Okay. Lots of burns going on in chat here. I won't read all of them, but burns. Let's remember to be friendly. Everybody remember to be friendly. I think everybody's being friendly, but I just want to remind everybody. Okay, so let's talk about viable potential theories. Viable potential theories. Are there any Atlantises in the modern day? I'm not sure exactly what that means. What could be potential viable theories for Atlantis? Well, one of them is an island called Thera. Well, the ancient island is called Thera. The modern day island is called Santorini. And about 1600 BC, there was a really big volcanic eruption that essentially blew up about about half of the island or so. I have a satellite image here of Santorini. And if we look at the picture, all of this used to be part of the island. And you can see here even the sort of the cone of what used to be the volcanic area. So when the volcano erupted, it blew out all of this zone. And on this island used to be an ancient Minoan city. The Minoan city was called Akrotiri, and there are still parts of the ruins there that you can go see. But one of the best theories that exists for what could have been perhaps the prototype or the initial instigator of Atlantis is what happened to Thera. This big earthquake, volcanic event, and then this giant flood where everything comes in. I'm missing stuff in the chat here. Congratulations, you're all actually a part of my substitute reality. Call customer service to talk to them. They're worse than Comcast. Ooh, alas. Isn't there an Atlantis resort in the Caribbean? Yeah, but that's just ha ha ha. And if you Google Atlantis, that's actually the first thing that comes up most of the time is the resort. So maybe Atlantis was Thera. Maybe this big volcanic island that sank a big chunk of this city into the ocean people remembered that. The eruption around 1600 BC is recalled in history. We know that it also created a giant tsunami that affected several of the other islands that were in the Mediterranean. So maybe this could be the sort of the thing that made Atlantis as a basis. It was from a long time ago. The Minoans fought with Greeks on the mainland, including the Mycenaeans, so maybe there we go. But there's... Okay, I'm typing in the wrong... Is that right? Is that correct? Nope, that's the wrong... Okay. Gotta type in the right spot. Am I typing... here we go. Helika. So, where is and what is Helika? So if we go over here to Greece, and I've got to zoom in a little bit here, we're going to be playing with the map a lot tonight, especially a lot for the next few bits. So if we look at the story, we will know that there are pillars, and their pillars are usually referred to these particular areas that are very narrow with water, and that there is an event where there is some sort of earthquake and then flood. So Helika was a city that's right here, or was right here on the Peloponnesian Peninsula. And in 373 BC, there was a really big earthquake that completely basically dumped Helika into the ocean. And a lot of people go, wait a second, so if we look at the timeline, 373 is actually during Plato's life. So Plato was alive while Helika fell into the ocean after a big earthquake and a giant flood. So people are like, okay, well, maybe that's where Plato got the idea, because, hey, it literally happened while he was alive. Maybe this is the sort of the impetus of him making up this story to make up this other story. So, like, here's something that literally just happened, but what if it happened to some other people a long way ago, long back in time? Yeah, so there we go. This could have been like the impetus for Plato to come up with a story. I really like this idea of Helika being some sort of inspiration for Plato. Now, I don't have a perfect, I should pause here and make myself clear. I don't think that there is any one specific event that perfectly fits all of the criteria in Plato's story. I don't think that Plato learned this from Timaeus and Critias. I think that Plato was well-read enough that he knew a lot of these ideas, and he took a little bit from a lot of different sources and mushed it together to create a great allegory to support the idea that republics are the way to go. I don't think that there is ever actually one big place called Atlantis. I just don't think that it ever existed. I should also note that once we understood geology, geology was a field that was really getting off the ground in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and especially once we figured out plate tectonics. And I should note, plate tectonics is a very new idea. It's not even 100 years old yet. Once we figured out plate tectonics and we actually know where the continents moved, and we have the ability to look backwards in time, there's not something that could have made Atlantis happen. I think it was made up. I'm okay with the concept of there being this story about it, and I actually have a theory of what actually caused all of this stuff, but that's, again, a whole other discussion. So, and the Earth said, yeah, don't do this anymore, erase and redo with the entire coastal city, pretty much. You thought Plato was inspired when an apple fell on his head. Because it's a remix. Exactly. Where's the opinion hat, Mr. I don't think? I should have been wearing the opinion hat on that. I should have. I apologize. So many edits to a single script. Yes. Getting off the ground. Nice. Just wanted to say hi. Hey, Gentaru. Welcome, welcome. Helica missed out on having the local Lowe's and Home Depot experts ready to rely on city planning. I don't think that there were enough sandbags that could have saved Helica. I'm pretty sure it was just gone. All right, so if not Helica, what about Spain? And you go, wait, what? Spain? Yeah, okay, so we need to look at some theories about this coastal region of Spain up here. Now, one thing it is important to note that in the story of Atlantis, Plato refers to the Mediterranean not being where Atlantis is, that it's in the Atlantic Ocean, and that the Atlantic Ocean is so big that the Mediterranean only looks like a port by comparison. So beyond the Pillars of Hercules, again, this could very well be the Straits of Gibraltar, which are referred to as the Pillars of Hercules, also the Pillars of Atlas, but Atlas is tied in with the whole Atlantic thing anyway. So if we look at the coastline of Spain, especially this region right here, you can see how it's very, very dark green. There are some theories that have been growing fairly popular in the last 10 or 15 years or so, where some people have done excavation work over here and have found what they claim to be remains of several temples that would have dated back to fairly early on, all the way back to the Bronze Age perhaps, and that they seem to have been cities, or at least moderate-sized towns in this area, that were basically wiped out when there was a big flooding event. So here we go. What can we have here that fits the story? Well, again, if we assume that the Pillars of Hercules are the Straits of Gibraltar, that would put these people on the other side of the Pillars of Hercules, which matches the story. Also, if we talk about these people being at war with Athens, there is a particular link. During a particular period of time around 1200 to 1100 BC, the Bronze Age collapses rather fantastically. And there are a lot of invaders that show up in the Mediterranean that come from the sea, and they're referred to as the Sea Peoples. So a lot of the people that are pushing the idea that this region of Spain could have potentially been Atlantis are also saying that some of the people that showed up in the Mediterranean were from this area, that joined the Sea Peoples that went on then to fight against the Greeks. There is a little bit of evidence to support this, but it's not necessarily slam dunk by any means. But there are several sites in this area that are going to be pretty important that people are going to look at. But let me reinforce this idea that in Spain, there's not as much physical evidence there that needs to have been there to prove that these people were sizable enough to sort of be worthy of being the Atlantis. They didn't have a population that was really big enough. They didn't have big founded and understood cities that would have been potential examples for this. But could they have been used as a prototype to then go on and develop the story of Atlantis? That's quite possible. And that's why I included them, because there's viable material there that could have been used to help this story. Not Lowe's, Home Depot, or Flex Tape could stop the ocean from picking up Helica and saying, "I like this, I'm taking it home with me." Oh, I should also note that the destruction of Helica was blamed on Poseidon. Their city god, their patron god of Helica, was Poseidon. And the story went that the people of Helica did not properly honor Poseidon, so he destroyed them. This goes very well with the larger story of Atlantis, who was potentially descended from Poseidon, losing their their godliness and being punished by the gods. So, if they were survivors of a big catastrophe, it makes sense that they would go on and raid and pillage the rest of the world. Sure, and that's sort of the potential tie-in here. You can see why they came up with that theory. Then again, they're still assuming Plato didn't remain to size. Right. Could have been a small settlement in reality. Right. And that's, again, all of that is pretty much where I'm there. And again, I'm mostly including that because of the fact that I don't think that there is one big Atlantis thing. I think that a lot of little things played into it, and then he picked a lot of stuff and kind of made this up. All right, so one more spot that is potentially a viable location is this area right here. This is in the modern-day country of Morocco, and it is called the Islands of Spartel, or the Bank of Spartel. And if we look at the coastline here, well, I need to zoom out a little bit actually. There used to be a series of islands here along the coastline that were inundated when the seawater rose. So there's a particular event back in global history called Meltwater Pulse 1A. I would love to go into more detail about exactly what that is, but we don't really have time for that tonight. Effectively, the level of the Atlantic Ocean was much, much lower during the last ice age because so much of the world's ice was up in the polar ice caps. So when the polar ice caps started melting, the seawater rose and thus eliminated a lot of the islands here. And you can see that there were remains of all sorts of little islands out in here. And a lot of people think that because of the location being, again, just on the other side of Gibraltar, that fits the beyond the Pillars of Hercules thing. The problem with Spartel is that there aren't a lot of people living there. This is going to also have a little bit more value because the people of Egypt seem to have communication across this area, even during the ancient period, because this region is connected to Africa and you did not have to sail across any oceans or anything to get there. The Egyptians might have been able to contact these people more easily or more readily, even though that is a long way from over here to Egypt. But if we are to give them the benefit of the doubt, this also makes sense as to why the Egyptians would have had knowledge of this, because it was something that happened on their continent, albeit further away. But I have, again, this is really circumstantial kind of evidence stuff. This is a lot of guesswork, and the stuff that's here in Morocco is pretty weak. Now, there is one more viable theory, and it is based on these two islands here in the Mediterranean. These are Corsica and Sardinia. You can see here that when the Mediterranean, if it were a lower sea level, that these would have been connected. They're part of the same ridge. Some people say that if we go back far enough in time, the Mediterranean used to be significantly lower in level, which is true. It did. And Corsica and Sardinia were connected, and they were both one big island that then managed to become two islands when the sea level rose. And that is a logical conclusion, because we do know that the Mediterranean used to be cut off from the Atlantic, and when Atlantic waters rose, it effectively flooded inside the Mediterranean and greatly increased the depth of the Mediterranean in many places, and would have likely wiped out coastal civilizations. No, it's fine. But that's the thing though. Like it's mostly just a geographic spot. It's not really somewhere people lived. So maybe the capital of Atlantis could have been here between Corsica and Sardinia, and then when the water level rose, it flooded all of the city. Again, this is really speculative. There is some evidence that says this could be it. One of the straits right here, this is the Strait of Messina, which runs between Syracuse and Italy. That could have been your Pillars of Hercules, beyond the Mediterranean that the Greeks understood over here. This area was populated during the same time that Athens was way back in history, so it could have been that they might have had conflicts with these individuals. Athens was sending out a lot of colonies for quite a long period of time, several hundred years, including colonies that were over here in this area that it could have run across people living on Corsica and Sardinia, but that would have been after the meltwater pulse. The timeline for Corsica and Sardinia just really doesn't line up very well with the Atlantis idea. However, again, it might be part of something that got added into a larger whole. So, those are the potential viable theories. There are a whole bunch of what I have titled garbage theories that just don't have any real basis of stuff, and I will very briefly run through them. Stuff like, they're the Azores. The Azores are a group of islands that are off the coast of Africa here. They're technically owned by Portugal. The problem there is they weren't populated for very long. They're hundreds of miles off the coastline. People didn't live there until very recently. Tell us what you really think about these theories. I don't think that they have a lot of value. I don't think that they even have a lot of potential credibility. And I should say that I'm not the only person that feels this. A lot of these theories have come out. They were sort of flash in the pan things where one person or two people published papers and they got really, really excited about it. And then everybody else was just like, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. And in the academic circle, these ideas have blown away, but they're still sort of being kept alive by people like the History Channel. Are you saying that the aquatic apes had nothing to do with Atlantis? No, not at all. Some people say that Atlantis was America and that America had contact with the old world much, much further back in time. There is no evidence of that. The theories of America being Atlantis were mostly popular when America was first discovered, and the people today that think America was Atlantis are mostly basing their ideas off of people that were writing back in the 1600s. I sense a rant on the History Channel. I don't follow a lot of the stuff that they do. So some people have posited that the city of Troy was Atlantis. They base this mostly on the fact that it's an earthquake-prone area and that they were dedicated to Poseidon. But that doesn't make any sense because the Greeks already knew that Troy had been destroyed in a big war with the Mycenaeans. How could Troy then have been Atlantis? That's kind of a no-brainer, but there are still people out there like, oh no, Troy is totally Atlantis. It's not Atlantis. There are some people that got really excited and said that the British Isles and Ireland, they were Atlantis. The problem with that is nobody knew about them. If you go back to the ancient world in Greece, they had no idea that the British Islands were even a thing. They didn't know that they existed. So how then could they have been Atlantis? Also, that doesn't make any sense because the population of the British Islands has a very well documented archaeological history, and we know for a fact that they're way, way behind the rest of Europe when it comes to archaeological development and cultural development. So how then could these people have been so far ahead? And also, Ireland and Great Britain are still there. Right? Unfortunately, these theories have a lot of discrepancies, so they don't really add up. Yeah, except Plato, he knew. Yeah, Plato knows everything, right? He looked into his Google Earth sphere that he had because somebody snuck back several satellites and an iPhone, and he was just Googling. I was like, look, there it is. If we're going seaside earthquake prone, California is a prime location for a dumb theory. You will rage quit speaking to anyone who tries to make that argument. Yeah. And I do have to throw this one in there because, unfortunately, this still sort of hangs around in weird circles of academia. There are some people that think Atlantis was at the North Pole or in Sweden north of the Arctic Circle. And you're like, what the devil are you talking about in Sweden north of the Arctic Circle? Well, this goes back to that theophany stuff where in the 1800s and early 1900s, there was that big rush towards explaining everything by saying that this race of super people lived way back in time and up in the deep norths regions covered. This gets into that world ice theory. If you're not familiar with what the world ice theory is, it's not a valid theory. It was just something that was very popular in the time. That they lived up at the North Pole, that everything was great because they had all the super advanced technology and could control the climate of the world. And they lived inside this big ring of mountains so that they could control their temperatures. This is wrapped in with the Hyperborea stuff. This is wrapped in, again, with Ultima Thule. This is wrapped in a lot of occultism stuff that was very popular that went on to influence Nazi stuff. Unfortunately, there's still some people that think there's value in that are still publishing things. And unfortunately, those people also talk a lot on things like the History Channel and YouTube, which is like the place where everybody goes to make their crackpot theories. But there are a lot of wacko theories about where Atlantis really is. I think the problem with the story is that it wasn't ever really real to begin with, and people are looking for ways to make it real, and they keep jumping to more and more and more ridiculous conclusions. Yeah, okay, so that actually brings me to the end of what I had planned. However, as always, if anybody has any questions about this stuff, they are just using confirmation bias. Right. They decide I want to make Atlantis here, and then I am going to find all of the pieces of evidence that prove that Atlantis was here. Because that's what you do, right? Atlantis was your heart in the whole time. Yeah. Hearts in Atlantis. There's a Stephen King reference for you. Haven't read that. I also haven't seen that movie. I've been told that the movie is substantially different than the book. So I don't know if I even really want to read it. I'm sorry, I don't even know if I want to watch the book. The G7 conference. Okay, so what's in the news with the G7 conference? Well, the G7 conference was this big meeting of the top 7 economic powers in the world, and they all sat down around a table and they all talked about stuff. This was the first meeting of the G7 that President Biden had attended, and he was actually kind of the big deal at the G7 because everybody was hoping that he would establish a tone that was going to signal the way that America might operate under his direction. And a lot of people were hoping that the tone he set would be significantly different than the tone that President Trump set. As a note, I'm not telling you my political preference. I think if you've been around, you probably know my political preference. But a lot of people in the world didn't like the way that President Trump operated. And we're hoping that President Biden would return to what they referred to as a more sense of normalcy. They had a pretty wide range of topics that they spoke about. One of the things that they took up was this discussion about corporate tax rates. And the reason that they brought this up was partially in context of the long-term effects of what COVID did. We are not done with COVID, by the way. the amount of the economic growth that has happened this year, end of last year, this year, is directly because of economic stimulus from all of the major countries in the world. So we can't necessarily use this current trajectory as a predictor of what is likely to happen in the future, because by the end of this year, economic stimulus is going to dry up and countries aren't going to be directly dumping money into the economies anymore. So one of the things that countries have had to talk about is economic futures. So a lot of the G7 countries spoke about how to properly tax companies. And they signed a resolution, and again, resolutions are basically non-binding. They don't really have any political force. They're basically just statements of good faith that all of the countries of the G7 are going to try to work towards basically increasing corporate tax rates to a fixed point of at least 15%. And you go, well, that doesn't sound very high at all. Well, that's actually significantly higher than it is in most situations in the United States today, because a lot of big corporations don't pay any taxes at all. Companies like Sunbeam Oster, GM, General Motors, even Amazon have figured out ways to use existing tax loopholes to basically pay no taxes, or to offset all of the taxes that they would pay through using investments in other ways. So making a fixed tax rate of 15% would increase the amount of money that was coming into government coffers, of course, because taxes go to the government to spend. And hopefully this, according to the summit that they had at the G7, would then be able to be used as a reserve of currency to stimulate the economy if the economy then does go into a dip, because it doesn't necessarily have to stay on the up and up. Another thing that the G7 talked about was distributing vaccines, specifically here COVID vaccines. And the developed world has had a lot of access to COVID vaccines where the rest of the world hasn't. This is something that hasn't really been talked about a lot, but the corporate entities that produce the vaccines can only make a certain amount. And because these corporations are mostly based in big developed economic countries, they are able to basically buy first dibs and even lined up buying doses prior to the doses being made available, which leaves only a certain amount of production to go to other countries that are less developed, that can't compete economically. So the G7 made a promise that between the 7 different countries that they were going to purchase and distribute 1 billion vaccine doses to lower income countries. Again, this is just a sort of, hey, we should do this. This doesn't have any actual... this is not binding. Another thing that came up a lot was China. China is becoming a more evident power in the world. This has a lot, again, to do with economics. The economy of China is increasing at a very, very rapid pace, faster than most other developed countries in the world. And they're also super shady about how they do everything over there. So one thing that especially President Biden poked at was trying to get the rest of the G7 countries to stand up to China, and also trying to convince the rest of the G7 countries that there needs to be more oversight and investigation into China, especially with how COVID kind of rolled up. They also talked about climate change. This is something that President Trump had not spoken about or been interested in speaking about at all, but they brought that up again. And another thing that they talked about to quite some extent was the threat of Russia's cyber terrorism / hacking department. I don't know how many people keep up with global politics or global stuff, but the group used to be called the G8, and it included Russia. Under President Obama, they basically kicked Russia out for being a bad faith partner and went down to being the G7. So Boeing and Airbus called a truce in fear of China taking over the airline manufacturing. Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that people are starting to recognize, that China is becoming an industrial leader and that they are operating in really, really shady things. They're still torturing a lot of their people. They're using re-education camps. They're denying people across their country freedom of speech and press and democracy and all that stuff. China is... they can do a lot of the stuff that they can do because they're a communist dictatorship. So there we go. But another thing that Biden was really pushing back on was this idea that Russia needed to be held accountable for cyber attacks. But the issue here is, again, it's non-binding. They're not necessarily going to be able to do anything about it because all they can do is sign a letter and send it to Russia that goes, we would really like for you to stop being a jerk when it comes to hacking people. And then Russia's going to be like, ha, we laugh at your puny letter, and then burn it. But, in the cyber situation, the only thing that I think is going to be able to conclusively bring about an end to that is if the other developed nations decide that they're just going to shut down Russia's hacking, which they could do by hacking the Russians. But, of course, that would make us just as bad as them. But there aren't really a lot of laws about international hacking. So either make laws and then hold people accountable or play the board as it lies, right? Anyway, so there's what's in the news. Did they secretly talk about aliens? Well, I don't know. If they talked about aliens in secret, I wouldn't know if they talked about aliens in secret. I was not there. Who hacks the hackers? Right. Quis custodiet ipsos custodiens. That's Latin, and it's from The Watchmen. It's who watches the Watchmen. Leet hacks. Joe Art Leet hacksor. Hey, you capacitor, and thank you for making me feel old because I know what leet speak is. All right. Does anybody else have anything? Anybody want to redeem any points? Anybody want to ask any questions or anything? Otherwise, we are about to go do the raid. You can't even hack your own computer to make it run properly? Oh. Well, you don't want to hack your own computer. You just want to make it run the right way. If you need computer help, let me know, Figment. Is there enough material to do Atlantis Theories Part 2? Not really. The only other thing that I could think of to do would be, here's a whole bunch more garbage theories. And just to be honest, part of me doesn't even necessarily want to talk about the garbage theories.
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
Part of me doesn't want to give a lot of these old bad theories any news or any wind, right? Because I feel like sometimes if they're discussed, they just become messy. I'm Spartacus, but most people call me Sparty. Cool. All right, so we are going to very quickly have a poll. And as always, our poll is going to be, what shall we cover next? So what I am looking for from you all are ideas about what you would like to cover in our next viewer request stream. Please be aware that I reserve the right to say no and alter ideas as I seem fit, but now it is time for everybody to refer me ideas about what you want to talk about. The search for Alexandria. Vernon, you're talking about where the ancient city of Alexandria is? I don't know if we know enough about that to have an entire stream on it, because we. Oh, okay. You're kidding. I try to give everything at least the cursory I guess, the good faith at the beginning. History of communism and socialism. Ooh, that's too much. Pick one, Brittany. The fall of the Japanese feudal system. So the Meiji Restoration. We could do that. History of the police. You could probably do that. Communism and socialism are different and have different lifespans and are different things. History of communism. History of typography. All right. Sting in the police. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to set this off. It's going to be a 3-minute poll. And the way that you vote, if you look in your chat, up at the top of your chat window, there will be a little down arrow. And if you are in the room, you get to vote. It doesn't matter if you are a follower. It doesn't matter if you are a subscriber. Anybody can vote. If you are in the room right now and you're listening to the dulcet tones of my voice, you get to vote. Mythical being, how mythical beginnings, how kings are born. Oh crap, I forgot to put last time second place on there. I don't even remember what last time second place was. Oh crap, I bet I can't even find last time second place now that I've started this. Shoot. Capacitor, we have already done history of the Cambodian people. That was actually my wife's birthday stream last year. So if you go back in the VODs, it's the history of Angkor, and I think the pun name was "Turned Down for What?" but it's spelled W-A-T. The history of Java. Better than JavaScript. Ranked choice voting? No, you just get one vote. You want a star voting system. We don't have the ability to do ranked choice voting in the poll. I don't know how to program that or put a bot on that. We only have 10 votes, and there are more than 10 of you here. So if you haven't voted yet, you get to vote. You facepalm so hard for that pun. Yeah, like Angkor Wat, the temple, is W-A-T. Turned down for what? You're welcome, Gentaru. You're welcome. History of puns. I don't know if I could do a history of that. It might just be a... Oh, that would be really hard to put together, though. Oh, man, that'd be really, really hard to put together. Just a string of great historic puns. I would have so much work to do. Nah. All right, everybody go vote. You're not voting. Still time to vote. Go vote. Did you watch The History of Swearing on Netflix? I didn't. I did not watch The History of Swearing. I heard that it was okay. All right. Give them Helvetica. Okay, so on the next viewer request stream, we will talk about the Meiji Restoration, which is when the emperor took back over from the Tokugawa shogunate. This is in the 1800s during Japan's industrial period. And we'll get to talk about all that fun stuff, like Japan industrializing because of people like Matthew Perry and the British and the English. So, yep. Meiji Restoration, it is. Okay, so a note about upcoming streams. On this coming Thursday, so 2 days from now, next stream is going to be our regularly scheduled history lesson, history going through time. We will not talk about Tom Cruise, except perhaps to make a bad pun about him. That movie is horribly historically inaccurate. Anyway, so Thursday we're going to be covering the history of several kingdoms in the Upper Nile. And when I say Upper Nile, I'm talking about this region right here. Meroe, Aksum, and Blemmyes. So right up in there. Cool stuff that I think gets looked over a lot in history. And I'm really excited about getting to talk about those peoples because they're really cool. Fun fact, free history fact for you, there are more pyramids in Sudan than there are in Egypt. It's the truth. Because those people built pyramids. Anyway, so that's what's happening on Thursday. We are not having a stream next Tuesday, but we will be having a special stream next Thursday. My wife's birthday is next week, and it is customary for me to let my wife choose whatever she wants and then do a stream about it. Yes, I know that's bias. Yes, I know that's nepotism. No, I really don't care because I get to do whatever I want to do, and it's my stream. And if I want to let my wife pick a thing for her birthday, I'll let her pick a thing for her birthday. So next Thursday, not 2 days from now, but the following week, we are going to go with her chosen topic, which is a look at medieval Japan, but specifically from the angle of art and culture. So we're going to be looking at things like what the people did for a living, how society was organized, the artistic movements, the religious movements, cultural changes that happened during medieval Japan, especially. So, hey, Ajay. History of Legend of Zelda. That's actually really close to something that she would probably like. Welcome, Jay Axer. Hey, everybody. How's it going? How's it going? Let the wife win. That sounds correct. It's not even letting her win. It's just I like my wife a lot. And if she wants to pick something that she's actively interested in, and I get to talk about history, which is right up my alley, hey, why not? It's a two birds, one stone thing. Hey, Akemi, welcome. Maybe you can find one of those fancy Japanese cheesecakes. You had me at cheesecake. I am a lover, not a fighter. I can fight. I don't like to. I would much rather just be chill and laid back and not have to be all uptight and mad about stuff. It's just not worth it. It's just really not. Anyway, so for history streams, again, this coming Thursday, we're going to have a regularly scheduled Adventures in History about what is sort of Central Eastern African kingdoms. And next Thursday, we'll do medieval Japanese history. And then the following Tuesday, now that we have chosen it, we'll be doing the Meiji Restoration. But special alert, everybody, big flashing special alert things. Because we have hit our magical 500 follower mark, that has triggered a History of Middle-earth stream. So all of you Tolkien fans and all of you people that know how much I nerd out about Tolkien, be prepared. This coming Saturday, which is the 19th, much earlier in the morning than I normally stream, probably somewhere around 1100 hours Central Standard Time, we are going to be doing History of Middle-earth Part 4. I have already typed out the outline as a brief sort of teaser to let you know what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be looking at the emergence of dwarven culture in Middle-earth, and we're going to be looking at the developments of the elves in the Blessed Realm, and especially following around a guy named Feanor. And if you know anything about Tolkien's world, you'll know that Feanor is a really big mover and shaker and does a lot of stuff to change the fate of the Middle Earth. And in fact, the Silmarillion, one of the more important books of history in the Tolkien universe, is named after the Silmarils, which are 3 jewels created by Feanor, so you know that this guy is really wrapped up into the future of the world. lots of interesting stuff going on Saturday. So Feanor is a Japanese cheesecake. Correct. It's got a Noldorian crust, and it's a big fan of Aula, and it's got a light drizzle of pride and long suffering. So, again, this is on Saturday, this coming Saturday, which is just a few days away, on the 19th, likely at 1100 hours Central Standard Time. I might push that back a little bit later depending on how much I want to sleep, but probably not. I'm usually up well before that. So get ready for History of Middle-earth Part 4. And spread the word. If you know anybody that is a Tolkien fan that's super interested with that stuff, send them this way. Otherwise, let's go do some raid stuff. And let's see who is around that we can go raid. Bum, ba-da-bum, ba-ba-da-dum-bum. All right, we're going to go raid Art of Bianca because I don't think that we have raided Art of Bianca in a really, really long time. Bianca usually streams in the morning. You're fashionably late. Jay, yeah, we picked up right around at normal time, but I will do this. For those of you that do not know, please do go follow Jay Axer. Jay is a great dude that spends a lot of time on his stream talking the basics of art and a lot about the business of art. Has been very, very generous both here in the stream and with his knowledge on his stream. Please do go check out his art and his channel. Also, his dear wife, Cami, streams, does amazingly great little animation stuff, has a very lovable artistic style that makes you feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. So go check out Cami as well. Both of these people are amazing, and you won't be sad for checking in on their streams. Otherwise, thank you all so very, very much for hanging out. We're going to go see Bianca. Our battle cry, as always, is adventure. And if you have any of those beautiful adventure hat emotes, you may throw those in the chat in plenteous number. Otherwise, I will see everybody again on Thursday where we talk about Africa. So you all take it easy, and I will see you later.